What if your dream airplane is a Bonanza, but you haven't started flight training yet? Should you buy it now or later? Well, aerospace engineer Marc Brodecki is facing that exact decision. So I brought in Bonanza expert Tom Turner to talk with Marc and me to sort it all out. We talk about the pros and cons of the two flight schools he's considering, whether to learn in a tailwheel plane, and the things he should consider if he buys a Bonanza now and learns to fly in it. Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk general aviation. My name is Max Trescott. I've been flying for 50 years. I'm the author of several books and the 2008 National Flight Instructor of the Year. And my mission is to help you become the safest possible pilot. Last week in episode 390, I talked about my first flight ever in an electric airplane, which was the Bristol B-23 Energic. And by the way, I just read that during their one-week visit to Palo Alto, they sold out 2 years worth of production. So congratulations to them. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out at aviationnewstalk.com/390. And if you're new to this show, take a moment right now in whatever app you're listening to and touch the subscribe key, or if you're using Spotify or the Apple Podcast app, the follow key, so that next week's episode is downloaded for free. Now, earlier this week, I talked about my first ever drone delivery here at my house. So if you'd like to hear what it's like to have a drone show up at your house and make a delivery, you'll want to check out the latest episode of my UAV News Talk podcast. Also, if you have any interest in ever getting a helicopter certificate, you'll want to hear DPE Matt Johnson give me a mock private helicopter check ride and see if you'd pass it. Just check out episode 115 of the Rotary Wings Show, and you can find both of these podcasts at my new network at aviationnewstalknetwork.com. And my thanks to these people who've signed up in the past 2 weeks to support Aviation News Talk. We have 3 new Patreon supporters. They are Robert Lundy, Michael Wood, and Eric Thompson. We also have some one-time donations from Brett Morrison via Venmo and from Curtis Berkey on Zelle, who wrote, "I really enjoy the show." And if you'd like to hear your name next week, stop what you're doing. Just take the 2 or 3 minutes right now. Otherwise, you might forget to support the show by going on out to aviationnewstalk.com/support. Coming up in the news for the week of June 30th, 2025, NASA's ASRS program, otherwise known as the NASA Blue Form, may be going away. A bill in Congress would limit use of ADS-B data. And a teenage pilot seeking to set a record has been detained in Chile, and we'll tell you why. All this and more, and the news starts now. My thanks first to listener Christian Palmez for calling to my attention this story about the NASA ASRS program. You may know that as the Blue Form. It's the world's largest confidential voluntary aviation reporting system. It was founded in 1976 through an agreement between the FAA and NASA. The program was designed to support the FAA and its mission to eliminate unsafe conditions and prevent avoidable accidents. Now, the idea behind ASRS is simple and straightforward. When organizations and industries want to learn more about safety incidents and why people did what they did, the best approach seems to be to simply ask the participants. And people are generally willing to share their knowledge if they are assured their identities will remain confidential and ultimately anonymous, and the information they provide will be protected from disciplinary and legal consequences. Now, a recent poll by AvWeb found that about 70% of pilots have used that NASA form at least once to report on safety issues in which they may have been involved in or observed. And according to SAFE, which is a Flight Instructor Professional Society, the ASRS program may be on the chopping block, potentially meaning the loss of protection from FAA disciplinary action for pilots and CFIs. 2 months ago, NASA published a notice in the Federal Register asking whether the NASA program should be continued. Now, this is an extremely valuable program to pilots, and personally, I would hate to see it go away. So I strongly urge you to file a comment. However, you'll need to do that almost immediately as the comment period ends on Monday, July 7th. And get this, as of today, only 4 comments from the entire country have been received. What we really need is hundreds of comments on the value of the program. So to make it easy for you, I've set up a special link, which is aviationnewstalk.com/comment, which will take you to the website where you can leave your comments on the value of this program. From flyingmag.com, Bill in Congress would limit use of ADS-B data. Lawmakers have introduced a bill that would block government agencies and private companies from using ADS-B data to impose fees on pilots. The Pilot and Aircraft Privacy Act would limit the use of data to air traffic controllers for purposes of safety and efficiency. It would also ensure that investigations cannot be initiated on the basis of ADS-B data alone. The bill's sponsors said that legislation is needed to keep airports from improperly using ADS-B information to assess landing fees and collect revenues. In the long term, they said, this tactic could lead to pilots flying without ADS-B installed or activated on their aircraft. So let's hope this bill passes. From AOPA.org, Court rules FAA antidepressant denial arbitrary. In a case that could open the door to medical certification incrementally wider for pilots who seek treatment for mental health conditions, a federal appeals court ordered the FAA to reconsider or further explain its reason for denying the application of an airline pilot who took an unapproved medication with characteristic side effects that are similar to another on the agency's approved list. The June 27th decision from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit stops short of ordering the FAA to issue a medical certificate to the petitioner, but the court, which is the first stop for those challenging a special issuance denial, declared that the FAA's denial of his special issuance application was, quote, arbitrary and capricious. The court further wrote, the FAA's thin and variable explanations in the final denial letter and in its brief on appeal do not satisfy that standard. The case was decided 15 years after the FAA first approved 4 commonly prescribed antidepressants for use by medical certificate holders, though the process of qualifying was and remains complex and time-consuming, and not to mention expensive. Applicants must navigate the special issuance process, including at least 6 months on the ground, taking the same dose of the same medication with no symptoms or side effects, the FAA notes in its guidance for pilots. From Kansas.com, could you land a plane in an emergency? 40% of young men say yes. In a recent survey, 25% of respondents said they think they could safely land a large passenger airliner if something happened to the pilot. However, the majority, or the smarter people that responded, 66% said they did not think they could steer the aircraft to safety in that scenario. That said, responses varied significantly based on gender, age, and partisan affiliation. In a sign of high-flying confidence, 36% of men believe they could land a large plane in an emergency, and 40% of men under 55 said they could. By comparison, just 16% of women and 23% of women under 55 trusted themselves to land a large aircraft. The poll sampled 1,500 Americans and has a margin of error of 2.5 percentage points. Despite the widespread belief that untrained professionals can fly planes in an emergency, aviation experts have doubts. Writing in The Convention, 5 aviation experts argue that flying a large aircraft is much harder than steering small planes, and that landing one is one of the most difficult tasks to perform. From FlyingMag.com, CAL FIRE and SkyRise exploring optionally piloted aerial firefighting. The California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, or CAL FIRE, operates the world's largest civil aerial firefighting fleet. In a bid to get more out of its aircraft, CAL FIRE is working with SkyRise to study the company's SkyOS, a universal flight operating system that does away with traditional mechanical controls in favor of electric fly-by-wire systems and simplified digital displays. The multi-year partnership is already underway and will cover multiple aircraft within CAL FIRE's fleet. SkyRise said they've already begun participating in CAL FIRE drills to better understand first responders' needs. The company is also integrating SkyOS on a recently acquired Black Hawk, which it aims to fly later this year. SkyRise is further in active discussions to see how its SkyRise 1 helicopter, a single control stick IFR-certified version of the Robinson R-66 equipped with SkyOS, could support CAL FIRE training and spotting missions. And here's the fun part of the article, which surprised me when I got to it. It says, Flying Magazine contributor Max Trescott visited SkyRise's facilities in California, get a first-hand look at SkyOS, a trip he covered in the February 2025 print issue. And I flew the Skyrise simulator and interviewed some other people back in episode 339. So if you haven't heard that episode, check it out at aviationnewstalk.com/339. From generalaviationnews.com, Piper crashes after student freezes on controls. This comes from the final NTSB report. The CFI reported that while his student was at the controls of the Piper PA-28140, he initiated a simulated engine failure, and the student executed the emergency procedures for a forced landing. The student chose a place to land and configured the airplane for landing, including full flaps. The instructor noticed that the airplane's airspeed was a little slow, so he instructed the student to check the airspeed, then recover from the simulation. The student retracted the flaps instead of adding engine power, and the airplane stalled and sank. The CFI immediately attempted to take over the airplane's controls from the student and verbally commanded, "My controls," but the student was stuck on the controls and locked up, he told investigators. The airplane continued to descend and touched down in a field near Newdale, Idaho, and nosed over. Both wings, the fuselage, the vertical stabilizer, and the rudder sustained substantial damage. Probable cause: the premature retraction of the flaps by the student pilot while just above the airplane stall speed. Contributing to the accident was the flight instructor's inadequate supervision and failure to regain aircraft control from the student pilot. And for CFIs who may be listening, you really should give some thought as to what you will do if you find that you have a client who is frozen on the controls and you need to take over. And my suggestion is that in an emergency, your elbow might really do a lot of good for you. From aeronews.net, NTSB preliminary report on fatal Aeronca crash. On June 7, 2025, at about 3 p.m. Central Time, an Aeronca 7AC aircraft, November 1846 Echo, sustained substantial damage when it was involved in an accident near Waterman, Illinois. The pilot was fatally injured and the passenger was seriously injured. According to witness reports, the pilot took his 3-year-old grandson for a ride to drop a homemade parachute made from a 16-ounce water bottle in a plastic grocery bag suspended beneath a homemade parachute made from black plastic. The parachute was dropped and the pilot reported over the radio that he was coming back around to see where the parachute landed. Witnesses observed the airplane maneuvering just west of the airport property. The right wing dipped, the nose dropped into a sudden dive, and an increase in engine power was heard. The wings leveled, but the dive was not arrested before the airplane impacted terrain. The 51-year-old pilot was killed. The 3-year-old child was injured. And from earlycountynews.com, stolen aircraft could land student pilot in prison for a decade. A student pilot has pleaded guilty in federal court in Macon to stealing a private plane from an airport in Perry and flying it to North Carolina and back. The 27-year-old man of Coconut Creek, Florida, faces up to 10 years in prison on 1 count of interstate transportation of stolen aircraft. He could also receive up to 3 years of supervised release following his prison term and a maximum fine of $250,000. According to court documents and testimony, he stole a Bonanza A-36 aircraft and, without the required flying credentials, flew it to an airport in Waxhaw, North Carolina last month. After stopping to refuel in South Carolina, he headed back toward Perry. However, he could not land safely because fog in the area was too heavy for him to see the runway. Instead, he flew to an airport in Cochrane where he refueled before landing the stolen plane back in Perry. In addition to not having permission to fly the aircraft, he possessed only a student pilot certificate. During the flights, which took place in the middle of the night, he kept the plane's transponder turned off. He is scheduled to be sentenced on September 17th. From aeronews.net, pilot dodged turtle just before fatal crash. And this comes from the NTSB preliminary report. On June 3rd, 2025, about 11:45 a.m. Eastern Time, a Universal Stinson 108 airplane, November 40518, was destroyed when it was involved in an accident near Farmington, North Carolina. The pilot and 1 passenger were fatally injured, and 1 passenger was seriously injured. The airplane departed runway 2 at Sugar Valley Airport, that's 5N Charlie 2, in Mocksville, North Carolina, and flew around the traffic pattern. Upon turning base leg for runway 2, the Unicom operator, who was looking out the airport office window facing southeast, advised the pilot that there was a turtle on the runway. According to the Unicom operator, the pilot landed about 1,400 feet down the 2,400-foot runway and then lifted the right main wheel to avoid the turtle. The Unicom operator stated that she heard the pilot advance the throttle after he raised the right wheel. After that, the wings began to rock back and forth. Then the airplane took off again. The airplane impacted a heavily forested area about 255 feet northeast of the departure end of runway 2. A post-impact fire ensued. And finally, from avweb.com, teen pilot detained in Antarctica during a record attempt. A 19-year-old pilot attempting to set a world record by flying solo to all 7 continents has been detained by authorities after landing in Antarctica without permission. A 19-year-old American influencer had set out on a mission to raise funds for childhood cancer research. He has been documenting his solo journey across the globe since September, gathering more than 1 million Instagram followers. On June 28th, Chilean prosecutors alleged that he submitted a false flight plan at Carlos Ibáñez del Campo Airport in Puerto Arenas, indicating he would fly over the city. However, authorities claim he deviated from his plan without notification, continuing toward Antarctica and landing at Lieutenant Rodolfo Marsh Base in Chilean Antarctic territory. Prosecutors allege that he violated multiple national and international regulations by altering his flight plan without prior approval and touching down on a portion of Antarctica claimed by Chile. His legal team told CNN that he experienced complications while flying but did not elaborate. The Chilean court has decreed a 90-day investigation period during which he must remain in Chile. It is unclear whether he will face charges or be allowed to continue his global mission. Well, that's the news for this week. Coming up next, a few of my updates. And then later for our main topic, we'll talk with a student pilot about his options for flight training, including whether he should buy a Bonanza and learn to fly in it. And in an amazing coincidence, on the same day I heard from him and his interest in buying a Bonanza, I got a call from another student pilot faced with essentially the same decision, except that he was considering multiple flight schools or buying a Cirrus and getting his private in that plane. So stick around for that discussion. But first, and now here's a Headset Minute by Lightspeed with Derek Schmidt. Derek, I've talked on the show about the dangers of carbon monoxide, and in episode 90, we talked with a Mooney pilot who passed out in flight from CO and survived the crash. So I'm sure listeners know it's critical to have a CO monitor to alert them to CO exposure before it becomes severe. What are some of the pros and cons of different kinds of CO monitors?
Because CO accumulates in a person's body, even low levels of the gas need to be detected as quickly as possible to avoid harmful effects or catastrophic accidents in flight. Any CO monitor needs to be sensitive enough to detect CO at lower thresholds and alert everyone in the plane when the gas is detected. Adhesive chemical detector cards will change color when CO is at a sufficient level to cause sickness, headaches, or even death. Adhesive monitors have a shelf life, requiring the pilot to be diligent in monitoring the date when the detector was placed in the aircraft. These can work when properly maintained and fully visible in the cockpit. Digital CO monitors are also available that detect from 1 to 50 parts per million. Their alerts are more obvious than the chemical monitors, and they can be mounted to the plane's instrument panel or portable devices. Remember to fully charge those devices prior to use and to bring them with you. CO monitors can also be mounted in equipment pilots bring with them into the aircraft. The Lightspeed Delta Zulu headset, for example, has a CO monitor built into the ear cups of the headset that provides audible alerts directly into the ear cups whenever the headset is powered on. The level of detection and alerts are customizable by the pilot, so the CO monitor will provide alerts that are tailored to the plane they're operating. Using the Lightspeed app along with the headset will allow the pilot to collect CO data to analyze and track fluctuations in CO levels. Whatever option a pilot chooses, the goal of the monitor is to improve a pilot's awareness of CO levels in their aircraft. So be sure to educate yourself in order to pick the monitor that will best align with your flying habits and the aircraft you are operating.
Derek, thanks for helping us breathe a little easier and stay alert in the cockpit.
Happy to do it, Max.
And now let's get to the good news. First, congratulations to Russell Kaplan. He writes, I recently completed my private and high-performance endorsement. I'm now working on Cirrus VFR transition training plus an instrument rating. Congratulations to you, Russell. And I found an interesting article on the Facebook page for General Aviation News. They wrote that dust devils, while often considered a harmless phenomena, present significant hazards to aviation, according to a March 2024 video from the NTSB. They provide a link to the video, and they write, in the video, NTSB meteorologist Paul Suffern notes that dust devils have been present in more than 170 accidents the NTSB has investigated since 1982. The video explains what dust devils are and how pilots can detect and avoid them. And my rough calculations say that's about 4 accidents per year. So you may want to watch the video and learn more about dust devils, and we'll include a link to that in our show notes. And just a quick reminder that if you still have not taken the time to sign up for our Lightspeed headset giveaway, you're not going to be the one getting a free top-of-the-line Delta Zulu headset worth $1,300. Instead, some other listener who took the 2 minutes is going to take the sign up will be getting that headset. And that drawing, by the way, is going to be within the next week or so. So it's not too late to sign up. Go out to the web now to aviationnewstalk.com/giveaway. And to help you get to that website, of course, there will be a link in our show notes. And of course, whenever you buy a Lightspeed headset, Lightspeed will send a check to support Aviation News Talk, but only if you first go to this special link we've set up for you to get to their website. So when you buy, go first to aviationnewstalk.com/Lightspeed, which will take you to their website where you can make your purchase. Coming up next, our conversation with Marc Brodecki and Tom Turner, all right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. All right, so today we've got something a little bit different. We've got a listener who called in with a question, and to help answer that question, we thought we'd bring in an expert. So today we're talking with Tom Turner. Tom, tell folks what you do.
I'm executive director of the American Bonanza Society's Air Safety Foundation. So I provide technical and educational support to the owners of over 10,000 Beech airplanes worldwide.
How many hours do you have in Bonanzas?
In Bonanzas, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000, most of that dual instruction given.
And our second contestant, no, I'm kidding here, it would be Marc from Southern California. Marc, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us your name. Tell us how old you are, what you do.
Hi, I'm Marc Brodecki. I'm 39. I'm an aerospace engineer here in Los Angeles area, and I'm interested in getting into general aviation and cross-country flying.
Excellent. And tell us where you're from originally and what experience you have in aircraft at this point.
So I grew up in the Netherlands, very small country, very highly controlled airspace. So general aviation is not quite the freedom you get here, flying from random airport to random airport as you see fit. So I actually picked up flying gliders there, sailplanes, which is really quite a big community down there. And it's a lot of fun to fly from. You can take off in the Netherlands and you fly all the way to Poland and back if your skills and the weather is favorable.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. I've only got one glider flight. What about you, Tom? You've flown gliders?
My first 6 hours were in Civil Air Patrol Schweitzers in Hawaii way back when. And on a lark one time, maybe 25 years ago, I went and got some dual in a sailplane in Tennessee on the 4th of July just for fun. But other than that, very little glider time.
Yeah, I think doing these things on a lark is good. I did one helicopter flight on a lark 25 years ago and then just got my helicopter certificate recently. So
I had one other glider flight in a Mooney, but that's a different story.
Oh, okay. We'll definitely have to record that as well. Well, Marc, you told me that you had 3 different options that you were considering for learning to fly. First, how long have you been evaluating these different options?
Like really seriously, I'd say for the last couple months. Just mainly because the opportunity can present itself this year to finally get my VPL.
And then tell us what are the 3 different options, or if there are more, tell us all the options you're considering.
Yeah, the 3 main options I'm considering all have their own pros and cons. So the first one is I actually work very close to Hawthorne Airport in the LA area. There is a school right there. It's a pretty small school. They have a Stearman though. It's all tail draggers. So it's really convenient, really accessible. What I noticed when I was training to fly sailplanes is that really kind of the frequency with which you do your training kind of sets also your overall pace. This whole skill retention thing is absolutely true. And now I'm older than I was when I was flying sailplanes. So it's even more of a factor than back then. So the fact that this airport is the school would be so accessible that you could squeeze in an hour before or after the workday starts. On the weekend, it's just as accessible. So that is a huge pro, even though the eventual plane that I'd fly would be an all-around or tricycle config versus tail dragger. Then the other option is Torrance. It's a little further away. It's in the opposite direction of work, but Sling is there. They have a very large fleet of training aircraft, so that has its advantages as well. And then the third option is, well, what if you just went ahead and already bought a Bonanza that you eventually want to fly and found an instructor to train you up on it?
Okay, 3 good options. And the funny coincidence, the same day I heard from you, I heard from a gentleman in my local area in Northern California who also presented 3 options, one of which was to buy an airplane and learn to fly in it. So I think what you're asking is kind of a relatively common situation that folks find themselves in. Let me ask the first question, then I'm going to throw it to Tom. What kind of Bonanza are you feeling like you would really love to own? And what's your budget? And so what, roughly what model year do you think you're looking at?
So I'm having studied aerospace. I think even more so, I'm drawn to interesting configurations of airplanes. So the V-tail is obviously something that appeals hugely. So an S-35 or the V-35, kind of in that 100 to 150K range will be what I'm looking at.
Okay, Tom, what model year does that sound like his budget's going to lead him to?
100, 150,000. Airplane prices have been wild in the last maybe 5 years, the post-COVID era. And I really shy away from trying to do estimates. You might be able to get into an S-35, which would be a 1964 or 65 model, or one of the early V-35s, a year or two newer than that, in that price range, especially if it had maybe older avionics. It might be a first-generation Garmin, a Garmin 430 type aircraft. It's possible. I think the prices have come back down into that range. So it's not outside the realm of possibilities that in that range you might find yourself in that vintage of Bonanza.
And what about the cost of ownership? Any idea what he's looking at from an annual basis? I think a lot of times people look at the cost of acquisition and they don't really think about, how much am I going to spend once I own this thing?
Yeah, that's something that I caution people about in my work at American Bonanza Society, to plan for ownership costs and operating costs, not just the acquisition cost. A long time ago, I figured out that there was no way you could get into a decent cross-country airplane for less than about $150,000 all told. You might get a less expensive airplane up front and have to fix it up to meet minimum standards, or you might find one that's already equipped. And I would caution anybody, especially when they're new to aircraft ownership, to try to get the airplane as closely equipped to what you want so that you don't have any upgrade costs associated with it. Very typically, if you were to fly, a couple of things. Frequency of flight, of course, is going to amortize the fixed costs over more time. But if you fly 100 to 150 hours a year, which is pretty active for most Bonanza pilots now, you might be able to look at the fuel price and figure 15 gallons an hour at whatever rate you're paying in your local area. Multiply that by 3, and that's a real good rule of thumb of what it costs to own and operate the airplane. One of the biggest challenges is going to be insurance on the aircraft. As a pre-certificated pilot, you may not be able to find it at all, so start asking. Don't post things on Facebook or ask on chat lines or anything. Go directly to an aviation insurance agent or broker and ask them flat out, is this a possibility for me? Pick a sample airplane. Now, you won't get a quote unless you have a specific aircraft registration in mind. But there's nothing that said, and I can say this as a former aircraft insurance agent myself, there's nothing that says you can't look at the online posting for airplanes for sale, give them that N number and say, if I buy this one, what's it going to cost? So that's going to be the first hurdle. But that was a long answer to a short question. What's operating cost going to be? Roughly 3 to, as a new pilot, if you could get insured in it, 4 times the fuel cost is a real good budget target.
Let's talk about more of the cost, because I think there's some hidden ones. So you've talked about insurance, which is very important, and that will come down as you get more time. And I would imagine that the insurance company may come up with some number of hours where they say, hey, we don't want you to solo until you have, X hours. And that's going to make it less risky for them because they know you're going to have a flight instructor with you for those first, pick a number, 30, 40, 50 hours, however many it might be before you end up soloing the aircraft. There's going to be a tie-down expense, so you could start researching, where would I keep this airplane? What does it cost to have a hangar or to tie it down outside? Maintenance cost, what does it cost to have an annual inspection done on the aircraft? And those numbers can vary widely. Another big thing, depending on the state you're in, is the sales tax. Actually, I think they call it use tax. So here in California, when you buy an airplane, figure that you're going to spend roughly 9% in addition to the cost of the airplane, and you're going to send that to the state of California. There are some ways to legally avoid that sales tax, and that would be if you have a business use, and a business use might be putting your airplane on the line at a local flight school under a leaseback arrangement where they rent the plane out for you and probably manage the airplane for you. Here in California, there are going to be one or two additional things you have to do in the first, and don't quote me on this, but something like in the first 6 months of ownership, more than 50% of the flight hours would have to have been out of state, as I recall. I don't think you can do all those hours inside California. And a good recommendation is don't make that just 51% of the hours, make it 60% so that the franchise tax board doesn't try and find one flight that they're able to find no longer qualifies, and suddenly you find you have a larger tax bill. And then, of course, hourly operating costs. Tom, any other big items that I'm not thinking about?
Well, first you mentioned the annual inspection, and typically in a Bonanza, a flat rate for an annual inspection is going to come in at somewhere between $2,000 and maybe $3,500. And that's the cost of actually having the inspection completed, accessing and looking at those things that are required to be looked at. And usually some minor things like oil change and the materials for oil change and that sort of thing. So it's a little bit misleading to think, well, okay, I've called around and an annual inspection is going to be $3,000 on this, because there are going to always be additional costs. And people talk about having the annual inspection from hell. And you don't have the annual from hell. You have the deferred maintenance event from hell. Something I learned as an aircraft insurance agent 35 years ago, and since that, is that airplane ownership tends to go through a cycle. Someone acquires an aircraft, they're excited about it, they fly it a lot, and then life starts to happen or the costs start to catch up with them and they start to use them less. Now, that's one fork. Now, the other is the person who has a real good use for the aircraft and they do continue to fly it a lot. But often people will go down this other track, and what starts to get pushed aside are those discretionary maintenance things that aren't required to be done. They're a good idea to get done. And pretty soon you've got an aircraft that Beech has a recommendation for overhauling certain components of the landing gear system every 2,000 operating hours with fairly good reason that's backed up with some of the mishap record. And you end up with an airplane that's got 5,000 hours on the gear motor and the gear transmission. And so you end up having a $30,000 bill to get the airplane back up to minimum acceptable landing gear standard. So you want to be asking about that sort of thing in the purchase process. And actually put a little plug for American Bonanza Society membership here. We do have technical experts, maintenance experts, and we have resources available to help you in the evaluation process of individual airplanes. But that sort of thing's going to come up. In the context of learning to fly an airplane, one of the issues that comes up is that you're going to be putting a lot more cycles on the landing gear system. You're going to be doing a lot more takeoffs and landings, which turn into, unfortunately, pretty expensive tire replacements. And you're going to be, by design in the flight instruction process, you're going to be required to do things with the engine that are not necessarily a good idea for engine longevity. You're going to be doing simulated engine out power, pull the power all the way back to idle and glide for extended periods of time to demonstrate to learn and demonstrate your ability to deal with an engine failure in flight. So there are going to be maintenance costs associated with the fact that you're doing a lot of intense activity with the airplane that you wouldn't be doing once you have earned your certificate. You'd only be practicing these things every year or every couple of years. So budget on the higher end of operating costs. If you do talk to people that own airplanes, do talk online with people that own Bonanzas, take the high end of the estimates during the time that you're transitioning, not only into how to fly a Bonanza, but how to fly. Well, you've got the sailplane experience will be very beneficial for you, but you do still have a lot of things you have to do that are going to put more stress on the airplane than would be typical for a Bonanza.
I want to follow up on just one or two things that Tom said, then we'll throw it back to Mark because I'm sure he's got all kinds of questions at this point. So, Tom, you mentioned don't get your information by going on Facebook or other kind of chat groups. I've actually just written an article for Flying Magazine, which will appear probably any day now, where I basically said, don't do that, because I had a situation I wrote about where there was a question that was raised and there were many, many, many answers that were in there, and none of them were correct. And so I went ahead and posted mine. And ironically, another answer got more likes than mine. So it's very hard to find out, all right, the truth might be buried in there somewhere, but how do you figure it out? And so I think it makes sense for anybody who's going to own an aircraft to join the type club for the type of aircraft that they fly. I've belonged to two different type clubs in the past for airplanes that I've owned, and they have always saved me a lot of money, especially when it comes to maintenance, because I could pick up the phone, call them, and usually narrow the problem down to one or two things and some specific things to ask the mechanic, as opposed to going to a local mechanic who's not as knowledgeable, who will start doing a less efficient process of troubleshooting. In other words, a more expensive way of solving the problem. So I'm a huge fan of type clubs. So, for example, I do a lot of work with Cirrus owners. I encourage everybody who flies a Cirrus to join COPA, the Cirrus Owner Pilots Association. And I'm basically telling you that, yes, if you want to buy a Bonanza, you definitely want to join the American Bonanza Society because it will save you money and you'll get access to good information rather than what you find on the internet. Tom also mentioned avionics and buying an airplane that you then have to upgrade yourself versus buying one that has everything in it that you already want. You want to do the latter. And here's why. Upgrading the avionics of an aircraft gets very expensive, not just at the moment, but also when you go to sell the airplane. A good rule of thumb is that when you go to sell your airplane, you'll get back maybe about 50% of what you paid for those new avionics that you put into the airplane. So you would much rather have the seller take care of that and have him take that loss, and you buy an airplane that's equipped just the way you want it, rather than you having the airplane down for months while all that equipment is being installed, and then finding later on, gee, I spent a fortune for this avionics, and the person I'm selling it to doesn't appreciate how much I spent. So definitely the better choice is find something that's equipped at least close to what you want, rather than something where you're going to do a total gut job and put all new avionics into the panel. So let's throw it to Mark, because Tom, I've talked a lot. Mark, what questions do you have about any of the three different options you've talked about?
Well, I think then, having heard your feedback on the ownership of a Bonanza to be your training aircraft, what I would also then want to hear is your feedback on going to a flight school that is specialized mainly in tail draggers and then converting later to Bonanza.
Okay. Well, that's kind of been my specialty in my 35 years focusing on teaching in ABS type airplanes, in beach airplanes. I use that term ABS type airplanes a lot in my work, Bonanza, Baron, Debonair Traveler. But the transition is actually not a difficult one. They're very easy airplanes to fly. And I'll come back to primary training in it in a moment. I started out in Cessna 150s, 152s, but I immediately bought a Cessna 120. I actually accepted delivery just before I took my private pilot check ride, and my first 400 hours or so after the private were all tailwheel time, and I loved it. It was a blast. I learned a lot. That's not to say that you won't learn a lot in something like the Sling. I'm a bit of a history nut, and I'd be very interested in the tailwheel airplanes also. And they're not necessarily old. They're just more, to use the term, conventional design. They used to be, they at some point, tailwheel airplanes stopped being called conventional gear airplanes and started being called tailwheel airplanes. But Max probably remembers when it used to be conventional gear, they were talking about a tailwheel. So yeah, that's certainly an option. I think something you said early on in the program, Mark, is really the key to getting through meeting your goal as quickly as possible. And it's just access to the aircraft. The frequency of flying, as you said, is a major factor in success in learning to fly, to earning your private pilot certificate. And given that one option is apparently very convenient to your home and to your work, I would lean in that direction regardless of which of the options it was.
I think that's good advice. If that was one of the trade-offs, in fact, for the gentleman who contacted me about the same time that Mark did, is one place was close to him and one place was far. And if you're driving, I'll just pick a number, 30, 40 minutes or more just to get to the flight school, it really makes it a lot less fun because when you get there, you might be a little bit more stressed because people who drive that you encounter on the road aren't as good a driver as you are, which of course is always the case when we drive. And so you'd like to arrive kind of fresh in a nice, calm, relaxed state of mind so that you really enjoy the process as opposed to needing 10, 15 minutes just to wind down after you get there to get into a good frame of mind. So I would vote heavily for any location that's going to reduce the stress in your life and kind of gets you to the airplane sooner. I frankly really enjoy the time once I get to the airplane because I just enjoy communing with it. I just, for example, when I did my helicopter training, I didn't want anybody there with me. And I was hoping that instructor would take forever because I just had so much fun just being with the machine and just going through the pre-flight and just appreciating the entire experience. And then someone shows up and starts talking at me. It's like, okay, well, it's not quite as much, not quite as relaxing. So yeah, I definitely vote for places that are closer to you. By the way, one of the things we didn't talk about would be the benefit of learning to fly in the Bonanza, which is that by the time you get your private, you're going to be really, really good in that aircraft.
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
Accidents tend to be driven not by the total number of hours that you have, but more by whether you have at least 100 hours in type. So accidents go down dramatically after that. My observation has been that when I teach someone to fly in a Cirrus and they get their private, they are a much, much, much better Cirrus pilot than someone who got their private in any other aircraft and then did the minimum 10, 15 hours of transition time. Also, I found over the years that it probably takes me a good, pick a number, 50 hours to feel really comfortable in any new aircraft that I'm learning to fly. And so that's a huge benefit of getting your private in a Bonanza is that by the time you get your private, you are going to be a great Bonanza pilot, and you're going to be a lot safer than somebody who learned how to fly in any other aircraft type and then did transition training in the Bonanza.
I wanted to come back to that point as well and a couple other Bonanza-specific considerations should you elect to go that way. First, the Bonanza has a long history as a primary trainer, primarily in airline operations, Lufthansa, Japan Airlines. I trained the instructors for the Altapan Airways program at Bakersfield a long time ago. And of course, KLM there in the Netherlands all have used A36 Bonanzas primarily in some of the earlier versions as their primary training aircraft. It's the first airplane you ever got into. A military derivative of the earlier Bonanzas, the T-34 was a standard trainer in the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy for a couple of decades as well. So there's nothing that says you can't learn to fly in a Bonanza. It will take a little more time because of the complexity. You'll have to Generally, nowadays, you'll have to spend more time mastering the avionics, because if something is installed in the airplane, it's fair game on your check ride that you be able to demonstrate its use. And we talked about some of the maintenance trade-offs and that sort of thing. Something that Max was talking about, I kind of alluding to here as well, is should you go to the Tailwheel Academy, or should you go fly in a Sling and earn your private pilot check ride and then purchase a Bonanza? You're still from the insurance community and from the accident avoidance standpoint, you're still transitioning into this aircraft. And it would be very likely that you would be required to get 25 hours of dual instruction in that aircraft before you'd be covered to fly solo, a requirement that would be satisfied along the way as you learn to fly. In the vintage of Bonanzas that you're talking about, two things to be thinking about. First off, single control yoke with standard equipment. Throw over control yoke. The airplanes were originally designed as business transportation machines, and the idea was the executive would be sitting there and not be able to interfere with the operation of the aircraft. So single control is standard. There are numerous options for getting a dual control system installed, and it's an easy installation, about a 30-minute installation, but it has to be done to satisfy 14 CFR 91-109 for the requirements for flight instruction. Also, I have to look up. 6145 requires dual flight controls in order to take an FAA practical test if instrument skills are required to be demonstrated, and you have to do a little demonstration of your ability to fly by reference to instruments in everything except the commercial check rides. So you have to have dual controls in the aircraft. So that's one consideration. If you have to add them to your aircraft, they're not inexpensive. It's usually about $3,000 to buy the hardware to upgrade to that. The second thing, and this would, as a flight instructor, I think be the deal breaker for me. Brakes are not standard equipment on the instructor side of Bonanzas. And you have rudder pedals, but you don't have brakes. And although there have been FAA letters of interpretation that have codified that dual brakes are not considered part of dual flight controls, as a flight instructor, I'm not going to get in an airplane with a brand new pilot and not have some brakes on my side of the aircraft. And retrofitting them, there is no currently supported kit to add them. I do know people that have combed through salvage yards and found the parts, and then using the original Beech drawings for the optional copilot brakes have had them installed in the aircraft, but that's a very laborious and costly process. So that might be a deal breaker for you in that vintage of airplane. They didn't really start putting brakes on the copilot side of standard equipment until the 1984 models, and that's a substantially greater cost than what you've budgeted here. But as far as actually learning to fly in the airplane, they're very well harmonized. They fly very well, they're very easily. You would probably find that after learning to fly in a Bonanza, that you had a little difficulty learning to land a Cessna 172 because it's jostled around by the wind much more. The wing loading is higher, and so the stability, I love 172s, but Bonanzas are really a rock solid airplane. So there are lots of pluses and minuses, and you can go either way. If you are going to go the Bonanza route, ensure that you satisfy whatever insurance requirements there are, that you have dual flight controls, and you're probably going to have to find one of the few that have copilot brakes or invest in that, and find a flight instructor who knows how to teach the systems and operations of a Bonanza and can take good care of it systemically to help you to make sure you don't overstress the landing gear, don't do more to the engine than you have to do to earn a private pilot certificate and such. So again, if you really do go that route, we'll help you out as best we can with the information. We have online resources for you for pilot education and training and such. I'm not here to push ABS that much, but only that I want to help you have a great ownership experience, whether you buy your Bonanza now or you transition into it after you complete your private pilot certificate.
Yeah, I want to just touch on two things. You mentioned flight training. for sure, you're going to want to get an instructor if you choose to learn to fly in a Bonanza who is very experienced. You don't want someone who comes to you and says, oh, yeah, I'll offer you the sweetheart deal. I'll only charge you, pick some ridiculously small number. And because that person is looking to get experience at the Bonanza. And so they're going to be trying to learn it slightly faster than you learn it. I've encountered those situations with Cirrus flight students with instructors who really weren't qualified. I mean, technically, legally, they were qualified, but they lacked the experience they need to really train somebody well. And then the other thing is partnerships. For example, you could cut many of your costs in half and still have pretty good access to the airplane by finding a partner who is looking for a similar kind of aircraft. And that might actually allow you to get a more expensive airplane than you're currently thinking about. Plus, partnerships can be a heck of a lot of fun. If you find someone who you're compatible with, and by the way, when looking for a partner, I think that's even more important than the airplane you pick. It's not that different from finding a marriage partner because you're going to spend a lot of time talking with each other. You're going to want to have someone who has similar values. For example, I've seen partnerships where one person wanted to spend lots of money to upgrade the airplane. Another person really wanted to fly as inexpensively as possible. So those are the kinds of values that you'd want to tease out, figure out ahead of time, just to make sure, is this a reasonable person? Plus, you want them to be what I would just generically say, a nice guy, or, of course, a nice woman as well. So partnerships, I've been involved in one partnership. It worked great. And so that's something you might want to think about. Tom, talk about qualifications for a flight instructor in Bonanzas. How would you find someone who really knows what they're doing?
Well, the American Bonanza Society has a program that we call the ABS Flight Instructor Academy, and it's specific. The tagline is How to Teach Beach. And it's specifically designed for an experienced flight instructor to learn the nuances of the particular models of various different models of Beech airplanes. We support airplanes going all the way back to 1947 through the current production year. Production is still ongoing, 58 different POHs for the different models of airplanes. So there are a lot of differences. And our academy presents those sorts of things. And the Flight Instructor Academy is an online course. It's about 26 modules. It takes about 6.5 hours. It's free to members of the American Bonanza Society. So if you have a flight instructor who's an ABS member or you have an excellent flight instructor that you want to turn into an excellent Bonanza instructor, you might encourage them to join ABS and take advantage of that. We do also have a vetting program called the ABS Recognized Flight Instructor Program. And these are instructors that have gone through our academy and some additional courses, online courses. We have a program called the Beechcraft Essential Systems and Techniques course, or the BEST training for the various models of airplanes. And if you complete a BEST course in the academy, you get some recommendations as an instructor from our members, and you verify that you have a certain level of experience teaching in these airplanes, not just flying, but teaching in them. You earn this certificate from us, and your name goes on our website, which is searchable to members as well. And we have a number of recognized flight instructors in Southern California. You said Hawthorne was nearby. I don't know if we have anybody there right now, so it's going to introduce other time-related issues, but that's one way to do it. You do not have to go through the entire vetting process to complete the online Instructor Academy course, though. So I know we've got, I think right now, 55 accredited instructors nationwide and hundreds that have taken the course, but we can help you find those sorts of people as well. We do have one section of our website open to the general public that if you go to bonanza.org and in the menu selection under the aircraft index, one of the drop-down menu items is tips for buying a Beechcraft. And we have information about cost evaluation. We have information on getting a pre-purchase survey or a pre-buy done on the aircraft, information about the training that we have available, and also something that we call the ABS Ambassador Program. ABS ambassadors are members of the ABS who have volunteered to speak with people like you who are considering buying one of our type of aircraft and just tell them more about what their direct experience has been in owning it. Very frequently, they'll offer to take you for a ride in the airplane so you can experience what it's like to fly a Beech airplane. And that's going to spoil you compared to some of the other types. But you can go, and you don't have to be a member to look at that. That entire page is open to you. And contact one of the ambassadors who is in your general area who has maybe that vintage. We list on the website their contact information, their location, and the model of airplane they own. You say, hey, here's the guy who's got an S-35. I'm going to go get a ride or at least talk to this person because I'm thinking about an S-35 as well. So there are lots of different ways to find a Beech experienced instructor. We'll help you out with that as best we can. And there's even an opportunity to talk to some of our owners, whether they're geographically close to you or not. You can contact them and talk to them about their experience owning and flying a Bonanza.
You mentioned, Mark, that the tailwheel school has a Stearman. Now, I'm guessing that's not the aircraft that they do the flight training in. And what aircraft do they do flight training in?
It's a Cessna, but the Stearman, I think, is also available for some of them.
But people can do their private pilot certificate in a Stearman?
I'm not quite sure, but it is part of the offering. It is part of the temptation of
that's very
that's cool.
Okay, good. Yeah, for sure they are fun to get rides in. I would think that that's probably not the most cost-effective way to get your private certificate, but it would be a heck of a lot of fun if you had the money and the time to do that, because it probably would take more time as well.
Yeah, if they have a Cessna 120 or a 140, those are the airplanes that the 150 evolved out of. I had a 120 for about 7 years. Phenomenal little airplane, performs really, really well on its 85 horsepower. And it would be a good training aircraft as well.
So let's throw it to Mark. Mark, the rest of the time is yours. Ask away. What questions do you have?
I probably would like to hear more about the transition training, what that involves, because that's probably an aspect I'm less familiar with.
Okay. Most insurance policies will mandate some sort of transition when you get into the airplane. So there's the stick. The carrot is you want to be safe and proficient in your airplane. And so the transition requirements for someone without any previous retractable gear experience typically are going to require that you get between 15 and 25 hours of instruction with an instructor who meets some stated minimum Bonanza instructional experience, usually 25 hours of make and model time or something like that. It'll be stipulated in the policy, and your insurance agent or broker will tell you specifically what you need. They also may help you find an instructor that can meet those requirements in your area. And we make the insurance agents, the insurance industry, aware of our instructor list. So they should be aware of those as well. That said, there's usually very little specific requirement for what you must do in that 15 to 25 hours. And so we have some guidance, again, in our instructor academy, how to put together a program. If I were to do this, and I've done this a few years ago with a friend of mine who bought a 1962 Debonair, very similar to the vintage that you're looking at, and he needed 25 hours. And so I started with basically the private pilot maneuvers customized toward the operation of this particular airplane. And I focused on things that often were not taught to pilots in like Cessna 172s, but you have to really pay attention to in these airplanes, such as landing gear discipline, landing gear extension, conformation, fuel planning and fuel management, because you have to manually select left wing, right wing tanks as opposed to having the on position like you do in some of the Cessnas. But a lot of what I did also was helping a pilot make decisions in the airplane that are based on the speed of the aircraft. So I would pick airports that are about 30 miles apart, because that's about the right distance to climb up to about 4,500 feet, level into cruise, get the airplane established in cruise. And now it's time to start asking the question, when do I begin my descent? And how do I slow into the pattern altitude? And so we did a lot of triangle flying between closely spaced airports to get the pilot up to speed. And then something I like to do, because I've got the proximity here, you would have it in Southern California as well. I'm about a 2-hour flight from Colorado Springs. I'm in Wichita, Kansas. And so that's, 2-hour flight in a Bonanza. We'd make one stop on the way, but we'd go up to Colorado Springs and I would demonstrate the difference in performance and handling at high density altitudes in the aircraft. And you could go up to Truckee or Tehachapi. I used to take the Olna Pond guys up from Bakersfield to Tehachapi. It was really close, but it was about a 4,000 foot elevation difference, if I remember. And so you could tell them you could actually show them how the airplane performs. So that's a long way of saying that you really need to design a syllabus that's going to not only teach you the basics of your private pilot skills as translated into operating the Beech airplane, but is also going to really highlight the design characteristics of this particular airplane and how you operate them in normal, abnormal, and emergency situations, and to get you up to speed on what it takes to manage this aircraft in a cross-country environment, including decisions about altitudes to climb to, when your descent begins, how to manage temperatures on the way up, how to manage speeds on the way down, all those things that need to be done. So you'll find, as my good friend did in his Debonair, that he was ready for me to sign him off at 25 hours, but it took about that long to really get him to the point he felt very proficient in the aircraft.
One more thing. If you were to continue for an instrument rating after that, what is recommended in terms of first getting some experience after your initial PVL or continuing right on? What is kind of the recommendation there?
Currently, if your goal is to earn your instrument rating, I think moving right on into your instrument rating is a great idea, but with one caveat. I would intersperse some use of the aircraft on cross-country missions in visual conditions while you do it. You want to get through the instrument rating syllabus rather swiftly, just as you said you want to get through the private pilot rather swiftly to be most efficient in earning that rating. But a lot of the transition to instrument flying revolves around working in the en route environment, working with air traffic control. So you can use flight following and get some cross-country experience while you were working on the physical skills of flight by reference to instruments, so that you don't end up with an instrument rating and very little experience talking to air traffic control or going places in the aircraft. So I would move right into the instrument rating. Get your private, take a couple of trips, take the kids for rides, go see grandma, whatever you're going to do with the airplane, go up to Tahoe and deal with density altitude, get some time in the aircraft, but move right into your instrument. But don't do that to the exclusion of continuing to get cross-country experience, because ultimately that's going to be beneficial to you in earning the instrument.
Yeah, I agree with Tom. I would advise you to go ahead and jump into it relatively soon. Back when I did my instrument rating, the FAA required, I believe it was 250 hours of flight time before you could take an instrument check ride. And what they learned, I think, over the years was there were low-time private pilots who were dying in clouds and, flying into clouds accidentally, who could not learn to fly instruments because of that rule. I think that rule dropped to 125 hours and then it's gone altogether. And so these days, I highly recommend people get started with their instrument training as soon as possible so they don't kind of fall into that category which the FAA created many years ago. And coincidentally, I'm right here in the LA area recording this from my hotel. And I know the kind of weather you have here. It's very similar to what we have in Northern California. Many days start with low layer of clouds that have come in overnight, and they don't burn off until maybe midday, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, something like that. And then they roll back in the evening. It might be 5, 6, 7, 8 o'clock, depending upon the weather. And so I think you're going to find that you're going to be much safer because you're going to be encountering clouds relatively soon as a private pilot. And it's also going to allow you to take more of the trips that you had planned without canceling them. I remember years ago, I was just a few weeks away from taking my instrument check ride, and I wanted to do a trip, and boy, I had to cancel it because the clouds just stayed low virtually the entire day. So yeah, I would encourage you to get started on that instrument rating as soon as possible.
I'm kind of out of questions on my end.
Good. Well, let me mention one or two other things. I would suggest that you go take a demo flight at both flight schools. Find out, hey, what do those planes feel like? What are the instructors like? What's the environment at the flight school? And then also look at the relationship that you're forming with the CFI that you're flying with, whether it's for that first demo flight or for subsequent flights. That relationship is incredibly important. And I've only had really one CFI over the years, and it was for my instrument rating, where the person just really grated on my nerves. I found him difficult to be around because of his personality. And I should have changed. But somehow I thought, it's going to cost me a few extra hours if I switch to somebody else. Big mistake. I should have changed. So the reason that relationship is important is you want to first trust the person. You want to feel that they have your best interest at heart, that they're there working for you, not working for them. Working for them might be, for example, just trying to build as many flight hours as quickly as possible without really thinking about what are your needs and, kind of catering to, what's important to you. So as a flight instructor, I try to always think about my customers' needs first. And if there's a situation where, my needs differ a little from their needs, I try and accommodate their needs because I think that's very important. And it helps to have somebody who you feel is knowledgeable, who answers your questions truthfully. And one of the best ways to find out if they answer your questions truthfully, if you hear them say, I don't know, but I'll look it up. I think there are some flight instructors and certainly some pilots who feel like they might be embarrassed if they were to admit that they didn't know something. And so they may tell you, oh, that's not important because they don't know the answer, or they may just make something up because they don't know the answer. So I think that relationship is very important. It would be, for example, if you were getting psychotherapy and you had a therapist, the relationship in some ways may be like that because you've got to trust that person has your best interest at heart and will keep you totally safe. Tom, any final thoughts you'd like to share with Marc?
Marc, whether you buy your Bonanza now or buy it later, we'll be here to help you. And if you have any questions, contact me directly. Happy to help at any stage in the process. Best of luck to you with your private pilot certificate, regardless of which route you take.
And let me just pass along one suggestion from one engineer to another. I know that when I was a younger person, I used to spend a heck of a lot of time analyzing and thinking and considering and trying to come up with the absolute best optimal solution. I would say you probably already have a rough idea of what's good enough. Now's the time to go out there, start taking some of those demo flights, and that will get you much closer to your final answer sooner. So don't get into what we used to call analysis paralysis, where you just constantly try to optimize for the absolute perfect 100% best right answer. Figure out what's good enough and what meets your needs. And if something that's close by because, hey, it's 5 minutes away from work, if that meets your needs, just go for it. And regardless of what you do, have fun in the process. This should be enjoyable. And if you find as you're getting your private, it's not enjoyable, figure out what the issue is and fix it, because you definitely want to have fun while you're flying. And the learning process is frankly easier if you're enjoying it. So make sure you figure out what you need to do to get set up that meets all of your needs, or at least most of your needs, and have fun with the process.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. This has been a wealth of information. So it's a great conversation.
Well, thanks for being willing to share this time with our audience, and I'm sure some of them will benefit from it as well. And definitely send me a note and let me know what you ultimately decide to do.
Yeah, let me know too.
Will do.
And my thanks to Tom Turner for joining us here today. You can read more about his newsletter and about his work at mastery-flight-training.com, and I'll include a link to that in the show notes. And just a reminder that I love hearing from you, and I read many of your emails on the show. If you'd like to send me a message, just go out to aviationnewstalk.com, click on Contact at the top of the page. That's absolutely the best way to send me a message. And of course, I also want to thank everyone who supports the show in one of the following ways. We love it when you join the club and sign up at aviationnewstalk.com/support to support the show financially. You can also do that at aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. We also love it when you leave a 5-star review on whatever app that you're listening to us on now. And of course, if you're in the market for a headset, please consider buying a Lightspeed headset. and using one of the links in our show notes, because if you use those links, they will donate to help support the show. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up. And remember that you can always go around.